Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We are live here today with Joseph Ben-Ami, and we're going to be talking about the possibility of a fall election. We're going to be talking about the WE scandal that is underway and a few other topics of the day. So stay tuned. Rod, do you want to introduce our special guest?
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have Joseph Ben-Ami with us today. Joseph has been a friend of ours over the past few years. He's in Ottawa, and we have appreciated the opportunity to speak with him different times, and we're really grateful to have him on our program today. Joseph Ben-Ami is regarded as one of Canada's leading conservative activist voices. He is the co-host of the Nick and Joe Show and a senior partner at Ditchley Public Affairs, specializing in strategic communications, political marketing, and fundraising for conservative causes. Joseph is a former naval officer, and he has extensive experience in strategic planning and communications in both the private sector and political arena. For 6 years, he was president of the Arthur Meighen Institute for Public Affairs, a conservative-oriented think tank. And before that, he was executive director of the Institute for Canadian Values. Before that, Director of Government Relations and Diplomatic Affairs for the well-known Jewish human rights group, B'nai B'rith. And he has served on numerous organizational boards, including the Advisory Board of Jews Against Anti-Christian Defamation. And we thank you for that service and all those different roles. He's been a policy aide to Stephen Harper and even Stockwell Day going back a few years. And so anyway, Joseph, I think there's more there to read, but we don't want to use up all the all the program with your extensive history and experience. But thank you again for joining us. We're grateful to have you on our show today.
Well, thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you guys today.
Well, we want to talk about some of the things that we're facing, and to do that, I just want to set up a little bit on the WE charity scandal because it's been developing, it's been snowballing, and every time that we get more information, things get worse. So what's been revealed recently just by Global News is that the WE charity it developed over a few years. We'll get into that a little bit, but it has a partner organization, sort of twin organizations, and one of them is the WE Charity, and the other one is the WE Charity Foundation. And that foundation was begun more recently, and it was incorporated in 2018, became a charity in 2019, and it holds real estate. It holds tens of millions of dollars of real estate. And it doesn't have a long record as a charity, and that is the group, not the WE Charity, that was actually given the government contract. So that sort of starts things off. Joseph, where do you see this going?
Well, I don't see this bringing the government down, for starters. I think that you know, there are lots of things that go into the decision to vote a government down in a confidence vote. And I'm not sure that all of those conditions are satisfied for everybody. Typically, a political party isn't going to look at the government that's sitting today and say, we want to fire this government and force an election, unless there's something beneficial to the party that's voting in that way. And I don't think that if you look at the polling, that you see that the opposition party, mainly the Conservatives, and the other parties that would have to join with the Conservatives in voting non-confidence are not really sitting very pretty in the polls. So they're going to flex their muscles, they're going to stomp their feet, they're going to make a ruckus over this, and rightfully so. But when the time comes, I don't see them actually voting to force the government out of office. But, you know, I'm reluctant to use the word corruption with respect to this whole scandal, because for me, corruption means something more specific, I think, than is generally referred to in the conversations that people have been having around this scandal and related scandals with the government. I don't really see the prime minister or cabinet ministers lining their pockets here, okay? What I see, and I think this makes the problem even worse, to be honest, is another example of a prime minister that is way in over his head. He's not competent, in my view, to be in the position that he's in. That's for starters, and I think that we've seen that time and time again. It's not so much that he's corrupt, but that he just can't help but step into these landmines or as we used to say on the farm, the cow pads, if you're not paying attention to where you're walking. So I think that's part of the problem. And the second problem, I think, again, making it worse than if it was just simply corruption, as bad as that would be, is that he's surrounded by cabinet ministers who seem to be either clueless as to what is going on in the prime minister's office, or if they're not clueless, they seem to be unwilling or unable to rein the prime minister in. So to me, the whole thing is just another example of government incompetence, or at least incompetence with this particular crew.
Well,
And I think that's, to me, that's far more troubling than just if it was straightforward corruption.
Well, this is his third big run-in with the ethics commissioner. And, there's the Aga Khan trip, the SNC Lavalin debacle, and now this. And
Right.
What troubles me about some of these things, not so much money. I don't think the guy's in need of money, pocket change, so to speak, but there has been money flowing back and forth with
Sure.
the we people. And of course with Trudeau's family and so on. These are, I think, incidental. What really bothers me is that it's patting one another on the back and using this as an opportunity to influence, public opinion, especially young people that are, so many young people are involved with this We Charity, and they see it as a great opportunity to serve as volunteers and so on. And I think that's where the prime minister gets undeserved, approval ratings from young people by, exercising this liaison with the We Charity and the government funds.
Right. It's another example of virtue signaling. Again, maybe not directly, but we're going to give money to this charity to help young people, and young people are going to say, "Yeah, congratulations, thanks for all the help," and then cabinet ministers and the prime minister are giving themselves a pat on the back. But in fairness, okay, and I expand my social commentary, if you will, a little bit. I find that Canadians in general have that propensity to do very little, or to do something that looks big, and then give themselves a big pat on the back and say, good for you, you're doing a wonderful job. And when in reality, it not only are we not doing a wonderful job, but all of the things that we're doing are largely ineffective or even damaging. So maybe I'm not being entirely fair by painting Canadians with such a broad stroke, but there is a certain propensity towards that amongst us here in this country that doesn't necessarily exist in other societies out there. We're very quick to exercise self-adulation in this country,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure that that's a entirely good trait. That's certainly, that was not the way I was raised, and anyway. That's my take on the We scandal.
Yes. Well, let's move over then to a bigger issue in a way, and one that it's much longer standing, and that's sort of the issue of Canadian unity. And I think that that became much more evident following the last federal election, was how disunited Canadians are just in voting patterns. But since then, things have escalated somewhat. Where is that at? Where do you think it's going?
Right. Well, it's funny. Nobody's really talking about Quebec. When we talk about national unity these days, we're talking about Wexit, and the disenfranchisement, if you will, of Western Canadian voters. Um, Look, the good news is, well, first of all, there's a lot of dissatisfaction, and justifiably so. The policies of Ottawa have not been very helpful to the economy in Manitoba, and particularly in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And there seems to be, Ottawa seems to be tone deaf to those concerns. And so you see this, the rise of this Wexit movement, and now Wexit-oriented political parties, who have not really advocated explicitly separation. I think that there's leaning towards that, perhaps more for strategic reasons than anything else. There are for sure people who are prominent in the Wexit movement who are basically saying it's enough, we should just strike out on our own. But my sense is that is not really that broad a sentiment within the movement or within the official now political entities. I think what you just see is a manifestation of justified anger, quite frankly. The good news, and there's always some good news in all of this, and is that I'm old enough to have been around with the national energy policy, and the anger and frustration that provoked back with Pierre Trudeau under his leadership when he was the Prime Minister, and then the rise of the Reform Party, etc. So some of this, I think, is cyclical, and my sense is that at some point in time a government is going to respond. If it's not going to be the Liberals, then it'll be another political party, and the West wants in. Well, the West will get in, and then everybody's going to give themselves a pat on the back.
Yeah.
That we've solved all of the national unity problems, and then another 5 or 10 years hence, we'll probably be going through something similar to this, maybe not on exactly the same issues. So to me, it's a little cyclical. But if I could take a step back and ask ourselves, really is this again a problem that's more general? It's not a liberal policy problem. It's not a conservative or a Green Party issue or whatever. But the question is, I think, whether or not government writ large, whoever happens to be in power at a particular point in time, are just too powerful, that they interfere too much and intervene too much in the economic activity, in the free market, whether it's in Alberta or wherever else. And they interfere too much in our private lives. And as a consequence of that, there's always going to be conflict. So when these kinds of movements pop up, I don't just look at the policies that seem to be driving the dissatisfaction. I ask myself whether or not, I have a good friend in Ottawa that I sometimes I say to him, what do you think the policy should be in this? And he keeps saying to me, the policy, you keep on wondering what the policy should be. My question, as he puts it to me, is why should we have a policy at all? Like, why do we have to have a policy in so many of these areas? Why can't we just let the free economy function? And so, if you're going to intervene, you're going to step on people's toes. And, even the Conservatives would be in a position like this. And if they're not stepping on people's toes in Alberta, the Conservatives could very easily be stepping on people's toes in Quebec or Atlantic Canada. So I think this is a manifestation of a bigger problem than just whether or not Western Canadians are feeling disenfranchised. I think that this is a demonstration or a manifestation of a big bloated government that intervenes too much in our private lives, in our private economic activity.
Well, the tendency for governments or rulers to exercise authority above and beyond, and to expand that authority. I mean, that you can be in a little town and be a dictator. You can be the mayor of a small town and be just as much of a dictator as a prime minister. You just don't have as broad of a reach. One of my concerns to the Wexit people, or one of my things that I would express to them is, you may think because you have a lot of good friends in the West that, you're going to run things the way you like, but especially for us who are social conservatives and concerned about things like life and family and those things, I think you're going to find, if the West were to be cut off, and I don't think it's ever going to happen that way, but if Wexit were to succeed, I think people will find that within their own ranks, there's going to be a lot of rankling and
Sure.
a lot of unhappiness, and they're not necessarily going to be happier with the decisions made by those who happen to live in Alberta than those who happen to live in Ottawa.
Right, and that, of course, is always the danger. As somebody far wiser than me once put it, the only thing worse than not getting your way is actually getting it.
Yeah.
So, what? Let's say these guys come to power, and what kind of government are they going to have? While they may be more free market oriented, I fear that in this country in particular, we've kind of lost our natural sense of individual liberty, and we've become quite addicted, even on the right, to government setting the tone and telling us what to do, whether through regulation or legislation or whatever. And Rod, I'm glad you raised the issue of social conservatism, because again, in my view, when you look at the policies that rankle social conservatives, let's say same-sex marriage, let's say abortion, okay, these are largely driven by government intervention and government policy. So it's nice to say, let's get control of the government so that we can impose regulations on our side the way we would like them to be. But in my view, I've always felt that the real culprit is government that's too big. And on the abortion question, we could spend a whole lot of time arguing about whether or not we should have laws prohibiting or proscribing abortion. I think it's a legitimate debate to have, but in the immediate issue is, we have 100,000 roughly abortions a year in Canada, not because it's legal, but because we pay for them. The government taxpayers pay for them.
Yeah.
And so, it's become a sort of a free method of birth control for people, and they don't have to act responsibly with respect to their personal relations. I don't want to have children, but I don't. But I'm going to engage in sexual relations, without any thought whatsoever to the consequences, because I know here's the government, society behind me that's going to step in and bail me out when the time comes. And, I refer to abortion here specifically, but you can see that time and time again. And, you want to be compassionate, et cetera, but at some point in time, you have to ask yourself, where does personal responsibility cut in?
The whole balance between rights and responsibilities. I mean, we certainly support every aspect of human rights, but
sure,
the responsibilities go with it. The more rights you have, the more responsibilities you have. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned the government getting larger, and I think that some of that has been more evident during this pandemic with the Prime Minister and cabinet accruing more powers to themselves. Do you want to comment on that related issue briefly?
Well, yeah, I don't know that they've actually taken more power per se. Certainly, it's interesting to see how easily the population has sort of acquiesced to whatever the fad of the day is in response to the coronavirus. I've been very tolerant and understanding of the dilemma that the government had, whether it was in Ottawa or across the country in the provincial capitals, governments. We were faced with a situation that people really didn't know what the outcome was going to be. They didn't know how bad it was going to be or not bad. So the initial reactions I found were, I think that in retrospect, we went too far. Governments went too far, but I give them a bit of a pass on it because we didn't really know. I guess what bothers me most about how the governments are handling the situation now is that we have plenty of data now to understand what we're really facing, and I don't sense that they're being too paying too close attention to the genuine science behind it. Notwithstanding the fact that they're going to go on television and say we have to follow the science, and I'm going, well, I'm still waiting for you to follow that science, right? I'm not sure that I agree with in Ontario. Here in Ottawa, we have mandatory masks. In Toronto, mandatory masks in public buildings indoors. The interesting thing about Toronto was they announced that they were going to be imposing mandatory masks 2 weeks. I think it was approximately 2 weeks before they actually implemented it, the order. It came into effect. And those of us in this business are scratching our heads going, it's kind of like John Tory making an announcement saying, we have to have these masks to save lives. Okay. 2 weeks from now.
Right.
None of it makes sense when you think about it, right? Yeah. Look, I'm just a big believer in people being prudent. Keep your distance. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. I'm not opposed to masks. I just it doesn't make sense to me to have a compulsory mask order. I'll say one other thing about the mask order. I don't know exactly what the details were outside of Ottawa, but here in Ottawa, and I suspect it's the same elsewhere where they're imposing mandatory masks now, you can have a medical exemption. In other words, if you have things like asthma or what is it, CPD or whatever, or other conditions that make it difficult for you to wear a mask, then you don't wear your mask. And interestingly enough, if you say you walk in and they say you have to wear a mask here, and you say, well, I have a medical condition, they're not allowed by law to question as to what your medical condition is. They may be able to say, well, you can't come in to if it's a private establishment, but they can't question your claim to a medical condition. But here's the irony of this, okay? And sometimes I think maybe I should be a stand-up comedian because I actually find that there's some humor in this. The very people who who are the most susceptible to infection are the people that you're saying don't have to wear masks. I don't know if you're following me. So you say, okay, well, I have asthma, so therefore I shouldn't have to wear a mask. And that's the government position. But when you think about it, if I have asthma, I'm the guy you want to protect, right? So it's just another example of we impose these regulations, again, with the best of intentions. I'm not saying that the government is going nuts. It wants to, impose a communist dictatorship because of or use coronavirus to impose a communist dictatorship. Although there are people out there who would, but it bothers me a lot when they implement these things and then they give themselves a pat on the back and they go home. They sleep well at night because they're doing something. At least they're doing something.
Right.
So anyway, there's
Well, why
Has it
don't
been a
we?
power
Why don't,
grab? You asked me if it was a power grab. Yeah, some of it is troubling. I see the Ontario government passed a legislation yesterday removing the whole reaction to the COVID pandemic and all of the orders and regulations and that from the existing legislative framework with the Emergency Powers Act. And I know it's the Emergency Powers and Something Act. I can't remember, but
right.
there was a framework with certain safeguards and procedures that had to be followed. And for whatever reason, the government has felt that the restrictions on its behavior and actions in the existing act are somewhat too onerous for it. So it's taken all of that out with respect to this pandemic and passed a new act that to a degree loosens the restrictions. It loosens the oversight of the legislative branch of government over executive government with respect to this stuff. That's troubling. And even more troubling, and I know we didn't bring it up, but is backbench MP Belinda Carahalios votes against it, votes her conscience. I know that there were at least 24 backbench Conservative MPs who were uncomfortable with this piece of legislation. For whatever reason, they decided to go along with the government. Belinda decided to vote her conscience and say, no, I can't support this. And they kick her out of caucus.
Yeah.
And I think I think that was very wrong. It's petty. To me, I find that, very troubling.
For sure. That whole shift in terms of power grab, I'm calling it a power grab, and I'm not sure that it's absolutely justified, but I have a feeling that if it were the other way around, if it were a Liberal government doing it with Conservatives in opposition in any province, they would not be taking it lying down. And,
I think you're absolutely right about that.
I think it's a double standard. Yeah.
Well, that's the world we live in. So you're not wrong. You're not wrong. That's for sure.
Joseph, are you up for some predictions today? I want to just ask you, maybe in the sequence, who do you think is going to win the Conservative leadership? Who will win in the U.S. election this fall? Do you have any opinions about that, or are you just watching and waiting as we are?
Well, of course, I'm watching and waiting. I think the betting money in the Conservative leadership race is, it'll either be Peter MacKay or Aaron O'Toole. I think that's likely. Anything could happen still, but that certainly seems to be the direction things are going. And I wouldn't, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet against them. I don't think that's changed since day one. They have the name recognition. They have the established relations within the party. So, I expect that it'll probably be one or the other. But again, stranger things have happened. And Donald Trump would be the stranger thing that's happened, right? Look, in many respects, I'm a Donald Trump fan. There are some things about him that I'm not entirely comfortable with. I have to confess that I don't like his style so much, but it's, it works for him, or it has worked for him. I didn't think that there was any chance of him winning the Republican nomination back in 2016, but he did. And once he won the nomination, I gave up my predictions for Donald Trump. He is very unpredictable. I think that it's a toss-up. probably, I probably, if I was a betting man, I'd probably bet on Trump winning re-election. I think that Biden is a walking disaster, and I think that largely the fact that Trump seems to be running behind in some key states, and that at this point in time, okay, mid-July, is I think it's largely an indication of how his style seems to shoot himself in the foot from time to time. I just don't think that it particularly appeals to average voters in the United States. So yeah, I would say probably Trump will win re-election. I'm worried about Biden being elected. I don't think he would be a very good president, and I'm not just saying that because he's a Democrat or a liberal or anything like that. I don't see him as being presidential material. But then I didn't see Donald Trump as being presidential material either. Look, and in fairness, while I'm not comfortable with his style, he's done some pretty amazing stuff, particularly in the area of the judiciary, which I think is going to, ultimately, I think that's going to be his legacy. Is we're going to look back on the Trump presidency 10 years from now or more and say, wow, did he ever make a difference with respect to the judiciary? And that will have a trickle through effect throughout the United States in many areas. So it'll be interesting to see, that.
Yep.
And so for our own country, this fall, could we be in a parallel election, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely. Pardon me. I think it's unlikely. I think that I would be surprised if the government would, under Trudeau, I'd be surprised if they said, okay, let's have a snap election with the Conservatives having just elected a new member and with the pandemic still on, etc. But they're in between a rock and a hard place because, they're, even though I haven't seen the polling numbers in the last day or two, but my understanding, I heard from a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, that in the last week that the Liberals have dropped considerably in at least one public opinion poll. And that's a dilemma that they face because they've been riding quite high, and I don't think they can sustain those high numbers going into 2021, because they're going to be faced with some pretty significant challenges, particularly on the fiscal front, and they're going to be faced with some difficult things that they're going to have to do to try to rein the spending in, so I could see that their numbers are not going to go anywhere up anymore. I could see them consistently trending down, and if the Conservatives can get their act together, I can see them trending up, and so the temptation will be to call an earlier election rather than a later election, I think, but it's at this stage, it's anyone's guess. There is a risk, I think, of a snap election in the fall. And, if I was advising political parties, I'd say, you better be prepared for it because I even if I'm not really sure I agree that it's going to happen, I think it's a very real possibility. So it's worthwhile being prepared. But the flip side to that is that if the Conservatives are going up and the Liberals are going down in the polling, keep in mind that if the Liberals are going down, chances are that the Green Party polling is going to be going down, and so will the NDP polling, and who knows what will be happening in Quebec. So just because their polling is going down and the Conservatives are going up doesn't mean that the Conservatives are going to be able to bring the government down.
No.
High Conservative numbers, in addition to high NDP numbers, I think, or high Bloc Québécois numbers, that might be a combination where you might see them coming together and bringing the government down. So, so those would be my analysis and my predictions.
Yeah. Well said. Yes, the chances of getting the Conservatives and the Bloc and the NDP to all agree to bring down the government are low, but not impossible.
Right.
And
you know, whoever the new Conservative leader is going to be, sorry to interrupt you, Peter, but whoever the new Conservative new Conservative leader is, he or she will have some significant challenges as well. The Conservative Party is not unified at this time federally, and notwithstanding the fact that you'll have candidates talking consistently about how I'm the best person to unify the party, the evidence throughout the campaign has been that they aren't really quite where they need to be individually to be unifying forces. I do have that concern, and I'm not entirely convinced that Peter MacKay or Aaron O'Toole really appreciate what's necessary to do to bring together a Conservative coalition where all of the elements of the Conservative movement feel comfortable working within the Conservative Party tent. That itself is going to be a significant challenge for them moving forward.
Yeah, sort of Aaron O'Toole is constantly saying, you know, how he's going to bring together the party under one, you know, the big blue tent sort of thing. And some people have said, oh, because he's going to allow discussions, allow backbenchers, especially on social conservative issues. He says he will allow them to, you know, free vote and free discussion. But, you know, what we've seen over the years is you're allowed to hold those opinions as long as you don't make any waves with them. I mean, people who like Derek Sloan, for instance, who really believes in you know, pro-life, pro-family, pro-marriage issues. I don't think that there's going to be a real tolerance. You know, those people are, you know, they want them in the tent, but they don't want them to speak up. And I think that's going to be the challenge. We have had Derek on the show here, and we've invited several others to speak with us, but Derek's the only one that came on here. But, you know,
Right.
we're quite interested in how that's going to play out.
Yeah, well, and don't kid yourself. It's there are a number of members, prominent members, in the Conservative Party who don't even want social conservatives in the tent. I think that's a mistake. Even if I myself wasn't a SOCON, I would say, you know, that's a mistake for strategic and tactical reasons. But there's a strong opinion within the Conservative Party that it's time to dump SOCONs, you know, whoever, again, that would be a very big mistake simply for strategic reasons. And but that's you know, everybody talks about how the leader of the Conservative Party is going to have to find a way to manage his SOCONs. I like to point out that the real problem is that he or she is going to have to figure out how to manage the anti-SOCONs. You know, and nobody ever talks about them as a movement that is perhaps dangerous to the future prospects of the Conservative Party. But I think they're far more dangerous for the party's future than SOCONs are, because SOCONs are a significant number, occupy a significant place amongst the membership of the party. You know, probably 45% of members of the Conservative Party would identify as being would be SOCONs, even if they don't identify per se as such, if not more. that's a hefty voting block, and it's just to say, well, we don't need them anymore. Go off and form your own political party, or go off and join the CHP or whatever. I think that would be the death knell of the federal Conservative Party. So I think that the new leader, the real problem or the real challenge the new leader is going to have on the party unity front is managing his anti-SOCONs or her anti-SOCONs as opposed to managing the SOCONs.
Right.
I think that SOCONs have demonstrated over the years that they are good coalition partners when it comes down to it. I think that we as SOCONs have been perhaps too ready to be good coalition partners from time to time. I don't see that on the other side.
Yep. Well, we should wrap this up. We thank you very much for your time, and this has been I hope, a very informative discussion for everyone listening and watching. Covered quite a bit of ground, and are there any points that we just need to emphasize before we close off that might have been missed along the way? Rod, do you want to?
Well, again, it's just been great having you with us, Joseph, man of wisdom, experience, and battle scars, and you're still at it. And we're grateful that you are in the SOCON tent. I know you've been working primarily within the big blue tent of the Conservatives, but you have been a faithful and a constant encouragement to the SOCON movement, pro-lifers, pro-family people, and we thank you for that service. There's lots going on in our country and south of the border. I mean, these cities coming unraveled down there. We didn't get into that, but there's questions they're going to have to answer in terms of, when does the president step into, cities that are just burning down there, and local authorities don't seem to know what to do about them. We could be facing easily that kind of issue in Canada. I mean, we're not that much different than the States. I'm grateful that we don't have cities on fire in Canada today, but some of these, Marxist, socialist, left-wing, causes that are being promoted, they could unravel quickly if we don't. So we hope that our government will have a little more foresight and deal with things, in a timely fashion. Anyway, not to get off on the deep end here, but we do appreciate you spending time with us, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Sure, thank you. And just by way of conclusion, you mentioned about political parties, et cetera, but there's also a lot of stuff going on provincially and municipally. And so let me just close off by saying, if people are out there, people of faith, people of conscience, and social conservative values, strong family values, I'd urge people to get involved politically at all levels. And if you need advice, you need some help or work or whatever, people helping work you along, feel free to be in touch with us. This is what we do. Our website is ditchley.ca, ditchley.ca. Get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to see if there's ways we can help you move along. But just remember, it's not just about federal issues. It's about provincial issues and municipal issues and school board issues, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the final concluding thing I'd say. Get involved. It's your country needs you. You're the future of our future generations need you. My hat's off to all the work that you guys are doing as well within your own communities and at the federal scene with your political party as well as CHP.
Thank you very much, Joseph.
Yes, thank you. And again, thank you for watching, for listening, and thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Rod. And we hope to see all of you again next week for another edition of CHP Talks. God bless.
Yeah, thank you.